What is going on, you guys? This is DerekJ Speaks, and today we are talking about AEW World's End 2024, the final AEW pay-per-view of the year, a year that has not exactly been too kind to AEW creatively, and some of that seeped onto this show in certain ways, but in a lot of ways, this was a very strong close for the year for AEW on pay-per-view, at least in terms of their in-ring, which by and large, in-ring wise this year has been a stellar year. And tonight on this show was no exception, and I will definitely get into a lot of those big highlights, but we will be starting off talking about one of the weaker matches of the show, which just so happened to be the main event, where Jon Moxley defended the AEW World Championship against Hangman Page, Jay White, and Orange Cassidy in a four-way match. This match had its moments. There was a Shield powerbomb on Moxley when Jay White, Hangman, and Orange Cassidy all put him through the announce table, and the table exploded on impact. And there were a few other things that happened in the match. Hangman went crazy, hitting moves on a bunch of guys. At one point, Jay White laid out Marina Shafir with the Blade Runner. We've been spending the last few months seeing Marina Shafir beat up all these guys, and outside of Willow Nightingale, no one's really got any offense on her. So we saw Jay White lay her out on this show. That popped the crowd. But aside from those few things, the match was a bit of a cluster. You had interference from, of course, the Death Riders, Claudio and Wheeler Yuta. For some reason, Pac's not here. I don't know why. But you had all this crazy interference, and it really bogged down the match. And in the end, Moxley laid out Jay White with a Death Rider, the DDT, and got the win to the shock of no one. Pretty much everyone expected Moxley to retain his championship in this match. Not a fan of him once again retaining due to help from Wheeler Yuta, but it is what it is. But even with that, the match, forget all that. The big key standout point here as far as Moxley and the Death Riders and this whole main event angle happened post-match, where the three men go to further attack Jay White when FTR's theme music hits. FTR, of course, got laid out by the Death Riders on an episode of Collision several weeks back. I think they even got kidnapped. So, yeah, but FTR, they're here in the flesh, and as they make their way out, they stop midway, the lights go out, and up on the screen flashes Rated FTR, and we hear that familiar Metalingus music, and out comes Adam Copeland back on AEW television for the first time since earlier this year when he basically shattered his ankle in that cage match against Malachi Black at Double or Nothing. He's out here along with FTR. They've formed this new group. FTR take out Claudio. They hit the Shatter Machine or the Big Rig on Wheeler Yuta. And then we have Copeland and Mox come face to face, and the two of them, well, they didn't really go at it. Mox swung, Copeland ducked, and then came back and hit him with a spear. And then FTR went and grabbed him a steel chair. He broke off a piece of the chair. We've seen him do this in WWE. In fact, we've seen him do this to the other two members of the Shield in Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins, where he breaks off one of the bottom pieces of the chair and locks in a crossface and uses that piece to wrench back on the mouth, and did the same thing to Moxley here. Claudio and Yuta, they save him, they scurry away, and Copeland gets a microphone, one that does not work, and then eventually he gets another microphone that does work, and he gets to deliver his little promo here. He didn't say a whole lot. He called Mox kid, said that he he being Mox, was growing pubes when Copeland first started in this business, and that he and the Death Riders are all his, and he and FTR, rated FTR, are taking it all. And not 10, 15, 20 seconds after all of this transpired, we hear Tony Schiavone on commentary say Tony Khan has just signed to Dynamite this upcoming week, a big trios match where rated FTR are going to take on the Death Riders of Moxley, Claudio, and Yuta. So that's a big match announced for this upcoming week's Dynamite, which in and of itself is a pretty big show, since that will be the first live simulcast on TBS and on the Max streaming service. As we enter 2025, all live television programming will be simulcast on TBS and Max, as well as Collision will be simulcast anytime it's live, that is, will be simulcast on TNT and Max. So that's a big match to put on that show, and this was a big moment. You know, we've seen this Death Rider stuff been playing out for the past several months. It's had its moments here and there, but honestly, it hasn't been clicking. These matches have been bogged down with all this interference, the overall presentation and the story and the people that they're going up against. Everything about it just has not really been hitting for me personally so far. So with how great Adam Copeland is, you know, at least in terms of his mic work and the way he's able to craft and tell his stories, I'm hoping him being involved, along with, FTR too, to a lesser degree, more so Copeland, because clearly this is setting up Copeland to be a new challenger for Moxley. In fact, in that trios match, I can easily see a scenario where Copeland pins Moxley to win that match. Yuta's in there, so he's the easy choice to beat, but I could see Copeland pinning Moxley and that giving him a shot at the championship. But either way, hoping that Copeland being involved here can help elevate this story a little bit, maybe make me a little more interested. You know, I don't know. No offense to Orange Cassidy, but he's not exactly the strongest face to go up against Moxley. They included Jay White and Hangman, which I was great to see them get a pay-per-view main event, even though it wasn't all that good. But still good to see them in the championship picture. I wish it was Hangman who was the crazy heel world champion on the show. I wish it was him as the top champion right now in the company, and maybe Copeland going after Hangman. Copeland Hangman could have probably been a cool world title feud, but we are where we are. Moxley and the Death Riders are the top angle right now, and now we have Adam Copeland and FTR going after them. All I can do is hope that it makes for interesting television. Speaking of interesting television, that brings me to the highlights of this show, that being basically everything revolving the Continental Classic. For the second year in a row, AEW has run this round-robin tournament. Hasn't been exactly a ratings draw, but that's not really my level of expertise. That's not what interests me. I don't really care about that stuff. I care about what are they putting on the show. You know, if other people are or are not watching, I'm watching the show, and I want to be entertained. And for the most part, this Continental Classic has been very entertaining. A lot of really great wrestling matches, and all of the final matches of this tournament took place on this show. We had the show open with Will Ospreay and Kyle Fletcher, and yet another great match between the two of them. This one far more of a brawl than a wrestling technical match. This was much more of a fight, highlighted due to the fact that Ospreay was busted open pretty badly in this match. He was bleeding a gusher in this match. It wasn't quite Eddie Guerrero Judgment Day 2004 levels, but it was pretty bad. It was pretty gnarly. And Fletcher looked very strong all throughout this match, but in the end, Ospreay did manage to get a win. He avoided a brain buster. He slipped through and hit an out of nowhere Styles Clash to get the shock pin, and he won the match here. So Ospreay, through the skin of his teeth, barely beat Kyle Fletcher, who throughout this entire tournament has been booked very strongly, and for a while there was strongly in the lead in his league of the tournament. And even in this match, he busted open Ospreay. He dominated majority of the match. It was almost out of nowhere, the finish on him, and it was the work that Kyle Fletcher did in this match that weakened Ospreay as he headed into the finals. But nonetheless, he did head to the finals, as well did Kazuchika Okada after he defeated Ricochet in the next match. These two, not quite as good as the opener, but also another really good match. Ricochet has been quite the topic of conversation on these shows for the past several weeks. The way they have presented him, the way fans feel about him, all the toilet paper, all the social media discourse about this man. I mean, it's really lasted for months, but obviously they've really leaned into it over the past several weeks. And for what it's worth, it has made Ricochet way more relevant than he has been in years. And that's for the betterment of his career. For now, we'll see how much longer it plays out like this. But these two had a damn good match here, but it was Okada who won with the Rainmaker, and that guaranteed us a final of Kazuchika Okada versus Will Ospreay for the Continental Championship later on in the show. But before we get to that, I do also want to talk about what happened after this match when Swerve Strickland came out. We've seen some backstage segments with Swerve and Ricochet on TV over the past several weeks, and Swerve the last time told Ricochet that if he lost here on this show, he would come out and embarrass him. And by all accounts, what he did here was pretty tame, but it did play into stuff that's been going on with Ricochet in recent weeks. They recently had their Hammerstein Ballroom tapings, and on that show at that venue, they all showered Ricochet with toilet paper. And so here on this show, Prince Nana came out with basically a wheelbarrow or a cart full of toilet paper and was passing them out to people in the front row. And Swerve counted down and had everyone all toss toilet paper in the ring onto Ricochet all at the same time. And Nana and Swerve are laughing as they leave. Meanwhile, Ricochet standing in the middle of the ring, fuming, pissed off. So this is clearly heading in the direction of a feud between these two. At some point soon, I'm sure Ricochet is going to absolutely murder this man. Honestly, it could happen as soon as this week, because if you don't know, Ricochet is going to be challenging for the IWGP Heavyweight Championship on January 5th at Wrestle Dynasty. That's the big joint show with New Japan, AEW, ROH, CMLL. They're starting to hype that show up a little bit. And on that show, Ricochet is going to be challenging the world champion. As of this moment, it is Zack Sabre Jr. So right now, the main event of that show will be Ricochet versus Zack Sabre Jr. And despite him losing here, I could see them probably wanting to do something to make him look strong heading into that show. And we could get a segment on TV this week where Ricochet snaps and attacks Swerve Strickland. And then maybe Swerve can be there to cost him the championship against Zack Sabre Jr. But either way, eventually down the line, we are going to get a Swerve Ricochet match. And not for nothing, it's going to be a damn good match. But back to the Continental Classic, Ospreay won, Okada won. They met in the finals, and this match was amazing. A lot of people have been talking about wanting to see that version of Kazuchika Okada, the New Japan version of Okada. We haven't really seen that. He's had a lot of really good matches this year, but that big match Okada mode that he gets into, that version of Okada who can go out there and have these long matches that start slow and then build up, and he really is able to showcase his talent and form a story in the ring. he hasn't really gone the full mode of that since arriving in AEW. And I want to say here, this is probably the biggest and best example of him doing that against Ospreay. A man in Ospreay who came out looking half dead. The dude had bandages over his head. He barely wiped the blood from his face. He's out here making his way down to the ring, wobbly-legged. You would look at him and the image of him as he's walking out with the bloody face and the bandage over his head and limping and wobbly-legged, and you're thinking to yourself, how the hell is this medical team clearing this man to wrestle in this match? But that's AEW for you. And it didn't keep him down for long because these two had an absolutely amazing match. This was fantastic. This is the kind of match that you end a long tournament with. In a tournament where it's built around having great matches, a match like this is how you want to close it out. And it was easily the best match of the entire tournament, which is funny because the second best match out of the entire tournament probably also goes to Will Ospreay in his match against Darby Allin a few weeks ago. But this one here, I mean, you got all the classics. This is not the first time Ospreay and Okada have faced off against each other. They faced off numerous times in New Japan. A lot of those matches were probably better than this one, but this was still really good. And of course, you had Os Cutter attempts. You had different drop kicks. At one point, Ospreay went for an Os Cutter, and then Okada hit him with a drop kick in midair. Then he got him up, hit him with, or attempted to hit him with a Rainmaker. But then Ospreay hit his own Rainmaker, and then got Okada up, hit him with a Stormbreaker, but it was only good for a 2 count. That, among many sequences in this match, are really what made it stand out and be so great. The early parts of the match were really good, but that closing stretch, those last 5-7 minutes of this match were what really elevated it to be, for me at least, the best match of this entire show. And in the end, after a series of crazy counters of different moves and Stormbreaker attempts and Rainmaker attempts and all that, it was one final Rainmaker from Okada that gave him the win. He wins the tournament, and he is still the AEW Continental Champion. He celebrated in the ring. Ospreay got helped out by some officials. He briefly shook hands with Okada. So he's helped to the back. And Ospreay's gone. Okada's in the ring all by himself. No championship. The championship was being held on a podium up on the stage. And out comes Christopher Daniels, who is an currently active EVP on the show. But he comes out and he says that as of now, he is no longer an EVP for AEW. And he introduces someone else who is. And out comes Kenny Omega, all suited up, huge ovation, big pop. He grabs the Continental Championship, saunters down to the ring, gets inside, and he comes face to face with Okada. And the fans are going crazy for it. They chant, "Holy shit." Okada gets the championship. He's holding it up. They get a good close-up shot of the two of them face to face. They get one shot in particular that had Omega and Okada face to face, and it just so happened that a giant poster was far in the background that was for All In Texas coming up this July. So, a not so subtle tease as to when we might get this match. Omega was gone for over a year with diverticulitis. Didn't know, it was very touch and go there for a while. We didn't know if or when he would be back, but it became very clear and evident that he was going to be returning eventually. And then we find out that he is having his first match in New Japan. He too is going to be wrestling on that Wrestle Dynasty show against Gabe Kidd. So that was cool, but even I knew before he makes his return to New Japan, which he has great respect for New Japan, all that, I understand that, I can respect that as well. But Kenny Omega is an AEW talent, and not just any AEW talent. He is one of the biggest stars in AEW. When you think about this company, Kenny Omega is one of the first names you think about. So for him to not make his first return televised appearance on an AEW show before coming back to New Japan would have been crazy. So it was good to see them bring him out here. And like I said, him and Okada, this match against Gabe Kidd coming up, I don't expect it to be some big grand match. I look at it almost like an exhibition just to shake off any ring rust for Omega and make sure he's good to go. Diverticulitis is a pretty gruesome injury disease to have, so it'll be a little hard for him to fully come back. So I look at this match with Gabe Kidd almost like a warm-up match for him. No offense to Gabe Kidd, but that's just kind of how I look at it. And they're testing him out to get ready for the big match against Okada. And I saw a few people, not too many, but I saw a few people thinking, oh man, that's too far away. What about Revolution? They announced Revolution is going to be in LA in March. That could be cool, but a match like this would be probably better off saved for a match like that. Now, can they hold off that long? Is this a segment here where we really are not going to circle back to this for another 6 or 7 months? Perhaps. Maybe they could find a way to do it earlier, but that's their first big U.S. stadium show outside of all the Arthur Ashe Grand Slam shows. But this is like a big-time stadium for them, so I could see them winning as many big matches on that card as possible. And Omega Okada, even at this stage of their careers, they're older, they have a few more injuries on them, but Okada, even in the match he had here tonight with Ospreay, proved that he still can go at that top level. We'll see what happens with Omega, but that's still a big money match. So if they can hold off for that show, I have no problem. But if there's a way to bump it up, do it a little earlier, and it makes sense, I'm all for it. Overall, as I hit the microphone here, you can tell how excited I am. Overall, I am very happy to see Kenny Omega and Adam Copeland both back on the shows. This show needs guys like that. This show needs people like, I don't necessarily need to see Adam Copeland challenging for a world championship in 2025, but someone like him, of his star power on this show, helps make the show a little more interesting. Kenny Omega helps make the show a little more interesting. That's why it was completely asinine that he made that comment in that interview all those months ago where he said AEW doesn't need him right now. Yes, the hell it does. And I'm very glad to see him back. And hopefully we get to see a few more names return to the show. But that was that. And all the Continental Classic matches on this show, those are really good. And of course, Omega, or I should say Ospreay and Okada, had easily the best match of the night for me. But a close second behind them was the rematch for the TBS Championship with Mercedes Moné and Chris Statlander. This was good. This was really, really, really good. This was even better than their first match at Full Gear. These two ladies went out there and competed in what people were saying was over 20 minutes, and as of right now is officially the longest women's match in the history of AEW. And you could feel it, but not in a bad way. You could just feel like these two were going at it. They were scrapping. They were really having a great match here. And you had different points where the crowd was a little quiet. In fact, you had that a lot throughout the show. They were in Orlando, and this was not the most lively crowd all night. They popped for the things that they needed to pop for, but at certain points they were kind of sitting on their hands and quietly clapping along to certain things. But in this match, there were several points where they really got into it. They got into it for both women. In fact, they were really behind Chris Statlander, but even Mercedes got her chance at different points too. So these two were doing their thing and killing it out there. But I was a little shocked because as the match went on and Kris Statlander is kicking out of all these big moves and she's avoiding the count out and she's reversing all these moves from Mercedes. Mercedes is getting increasingly frustrated. All signs pointed to a title change here. And even the fact that this match was happening, because this rematch was announced right the hell out of nowhere. It was like barely even a week before this show that they made the match official. There was no real storyline reason for this match taking place after Kris Statlander already lost at Full Gear. And her losing again sounded like a crazy idea. But lose again she did, because Mercedes was able to finally pin Kris Statlander down, had some kind of crazy twisted up roll up on her to get the win, secure the win, and retain her TBS championship. So Mercedes is still champion. Kris Statlander loses again. And that shocked me. I personally would not have beaten Kris Statlander again, but I wonder if this is still not done. Yes, Mercedes did beat her twice now, but these two have great chemistry together. We know how much of a wrestling mark Tony Khan is. I could see him finding a way to get a third match out of these two, and maybe that's when Statlander finally wins. Or, because otherwise, who else is there to beat her? You know, people will throw out Athena and have Athena beat her in July. Can we really wait that long to see Mercedes finally lose a match? And two, Athena has been kidnapped and has been hidden away in Ring of Honor purgatory for like 3 years now. I seriously doubt she's gonna finally come back and face Mercedes. But stranger things have happened. And there's no one else on the roster that I can really look at like, yeah, that's gonna be the person who beats her for that championship. I would say Jamie Hayter, but I really would love to see Jamie Hayter go after the Women's World Championship, considering that's the belt that she never lost in the first place. But you never know. Maybe they pivot and go in that direction, which I would have no problem with. I love Jamie Hayter. She's great. Her and Mercedes could have a great match. She might break Mercedes in half, but that could be a really good match. But I'm still thinking that there's a possibility we might get a third match out of these two. And if we do, more power to them. They've had two excellent matches, two of the best women's matches of the entire year between Kris Statlander and Mercedes. But great stuff here on this show. We also had a really good match for the International Championship with Konosuke Takeshita defending against Powerhouse Hobbs. Thought this was a really good match as well. You had the fans chanting meat at Powerhouse Hobbs, so they were really behind him. And there was a few wonky moments here. At one point, both men were up top. They were setting up for some big superplex spot, and you could see them start to slowly slip, and then eventually they both kind of fell, which props to the commentary team because they, quick on their feet, blamed it on the fact that Hobbs is recovering from knee surgery. He had his knee in a brace. Takeshita was working over the knee throughout the match, and they thought well enough to blame it on that, and that, his knee just gave out. So that was really smart of them. But eventually they came back around, and they did do the spot, and Takeshita hit the superplex on him. A really cool near fall in this match was when Takeshita was going for his big, stiff running knee, but then Hobbs caught him in midair with a spine buster, and it was only good for a 2 count. That popped the crowd big time because they really thought a title change was coming. And even for a second, I did too. But I figured that Takeshita was going to get the win here. He locked Hobbs in a front face guillotine and then hit him with the Falcon Arrow and got the win. Takeshita, what can you say? He is very great. He is extremely underutilized in this company, even with the championship. But when the bell rings, he can go out there and put on a damn good match. And Powerhouse Hobbs, he's not some well-known ring technician, but he has proven himself to be a very strong performer in the ring, and he's been out with the injury for all these months. He came back. They're putting him in the babyface role, and he had a chance to go out here and have a strong quality pay-per-view match, and I thought he delivered very well. And I would very much love to see more pay-per-view matches for him in 2025. A guy like Powerhouse Hobbs is someone who I would like to invest time in trying to build up as a top guy eventually. Can he just be immediately thrusted into that spot right now? No, but with enough time and build up, he could be. So hopefully they look to put him in a good spot next year. We had the AEW Women's World Championship on the line. Mariah May defending against Thunder Rosa in a Tijuana street fight. These two had a pretty good brawl. This was not quite as good as some of the other brawls and hardcore matches we've seen with the women in AEW this year. Top of my list as far as that's concerned was the street fight between Chris Statlander and Willow Nightingale from All Out. That was great. But even Thunder Rosa, she's had a Day of the Dead match. She's had a bull rope match, a couple of those kinds of matches on Collision in recent months. So she's had some really good hardcore matches too. This one was good, but it just wasn't all that great. But they did have some, all the plunder and garbage here in this match. Honestly, this match had less blood than some of the other matches on this show that were not hardcore matches, which I thought was funny. But Thunder Rosa had a piñata, and she cracked it open and revealed some thumbtacks that were in it. And eventually she was the one who got planted onto the thumbtacks by Mariah May. Thunder Rosa, her dad, who Mariah May has mentioned in promos leading up to this match, he was in the front row. He had his cane with him. Mariah May at one point stole the cane and was mocking him to his face. And then Thunder Rosa grabbed the cane and started using it on Mariah May. This all built up to a finish where, as Thunder Rosa is choking out Mariah May with a chain, Mariah gets a handful of dirt from Tijuana. I guess they explained that it was something that was given to Thunder Rosa by her dad or something like that. She had some dirt. The dirt had some significance. It just went over my head, but they did explain why it was significant. But she threw the dirt in Thunder Rosa's eyes, and then she got her in position to hit a pile driver off the apron down through a table on the floor. It was Falls Count Anywhere, so she got the 1, 2, 3, and she retains her championship. So Thunder Rosa, always great. Mariah May, an incredible athlete. These two had a really good match. It just was not one of the greatest matches of the entire night, but it was still a good match. Mariah May, the direction for her is a rematch with Toni Storm, who once again, Toni Storm is amazing. She had a match on the pre-show, which I saw some of, but then I didn't really get to see the finish. She's doing this either amnesia or she is still timeless Toni Storm and she's just acting like old school rocker Toni Storm, but she's being rock star Toni Storm but acting like she's brand new to AEW. And I just think her character work here is great. It's always been great, but it's still great here. But I think eventually these two are going to lock horns in a rematch for that championship, and I could easily see Toni Storm regaining the belt. I don't know if she's going to do it in this version or if they're going to reveal and ultimately bring back timeless Toni Storm to do it, but whatever direction they head with it, I look forward to seeing how it plays out. But that's probably the best thing they can have for Mariah May. She's been killing it. She's had some really good matches this year. It's just ever since All In, when she beat Toni Storm, and that was the end of their feud and their story up to that point, she just has not really done much significant or important on the show. And it's really disheartening that they didn't really have a great plan for her following such a great story. One of the best women's feuds of the entire year. One of the best storylines they've ever done. Not even just with the women, but in general. And to not have a follow-up for Mariah May after that. Even the stuff with Mina Shirakawa, which was a clear slam dunk program, that kind of felt I don't know if underutilized is the right word for it, but underwhelming, I think, would be a good word for it. But either way, it is what it is. Speaking of underwhelming, that leads us to MJF versus Adam Cole. I was a big fan of Better Than You, Baby, and their reluctant partnership last year that blossomed into a bromance and a close kinship between these two. That entire story was honestly one of the last fun storylines this company has done. And through a series of unfortunate events with injuries and very piss poor booking decisions over the last year involving these two men, it all led to this match where this was the big blow off. They were fighting for MJF's diamond ring for reasons. And I mean, hey, they did what they could. MJF always tries to get a reaction out of the crowd. The crowd, they do still like Adam Cole, but not nearly as much as they did before the injury. He has been less over since coming back. But these two, they went out there. They were both bleeding. Cole was busted open. A little bit later, MJF was busted open. They were both bleeding. But there was a certain point in this match where they're duking it out. They're slugging it out, throwing punches. Weak punches, at least from Adam Cole. But they were doing it, and the crowd was pretty quiet. And I just looked at that image for a few seconds and thought to myself, man, this is how this story ends. This story that garnered such a strong reaction from the crowd. This is a story that led these two to main event their first big Wembley show last year. That's how big of a story it was last year. And to see it kind of go out on a whimper like this on this show is sad, but also brought me great joy because I hope and pray this is the end of this story. I was hoping that heading into this show, we got the match. It was fine. It was one of the weakest matches of the show, but it was fine. But Matt Taven and Mike Bennett, they were out there. They were guarding the ring, hoping that MJF would not use it. But when MJF went to the outside, he smacked the steel steps, made a loud sound, was calling for the referee. The referee looks over. He sees Taven and Bennett, and the referee is a complete idiot, as most AEW referees are. And so he threw out Taven and Bennett. And as they were leaving, they were throwing a fuss. Security came out there to try to get them away. MJF goes to the outside. He gets the ring. He brings it back into the ring to use it on Adam Cole. But Cole catches him with a super kick. And then Cole gets the ring. He goes to use it on MJF. But then MJF hits Cole with a low blow. And then hits him with the Heat Seeker. And he is the one to emerge victorious in this match. So MJF beats Adam Cole, rightfully so. And then after the match, as MJF attempted to Pillmanize Cole, out came Roderick Strong, and then eventually Kyle O'Reilly. They all ganged up on MJF, laid him out. They held up MJF for Adam Cole to knock out with the ring, and Cole, O'Reilly, Roddy, and then eventually Taven and Bennett, they all came out. They all stood tall. They raised each other's arms. They hugged. Excalibur's on commentary talking about how this is a grand reunion for these guys. And the crowd went mild for it. And so did I, because I don't really care. There was a time when these, or at least a combination of these guys, ruled the wrestling world in certain aspects, back in NXT. Even before NXT, you go back to Ring of Honor with some of these guys. O'Reilly and Cole, they got their start together in Ring of Honor. That's how far back they go. So, and I'm sure there are some people out there who looked at a moment like this and felt happy seeing these guys all united, standing tall together. I personally don't care. So long as this means the stuff between Adam Cole and MJF is over, I'm glad they didn't pull any swerves. There was no Wardlow return. There was no screwing over Adam Cole and everyone joining MJF and then prolonging this feud even longer. None of that happened. This feud's over. It's done. It's dead. Everyone can move on. And I don't care where they go so long as they no longer cross paths with each other. So that's that. And that's where we wrap things up. Top to bottom, this was a very good show. Like I said, the two opening matches in the semifinals of the C2 were really good. The finals with OKADA and Ospreay was fantastic. Mercedes and Chris Statlander had a fantastic match. And of course, the returns of Kenny Omega and Adam Copeland on this show made for a very strong final pay-per-view for AEW. You can quibble about their weekly television and the lack of interest and entertainment and care over their creative direction throughout the year with a lot of these stories, but in-ring wise on these pay-per-views for the most part this year have been very strong. And I put this up there. I tell you what, this World's End show was a hell of a lot better than the one last year. But I digress. Good stuff here, and now we can move onward and upward. Hopefully 2025 can be a better year for AEW. I mean, they've had success this year, but just in terms of the week-to-week product, I hope they can turn it around, bring some of those fans back, and make a lot of people, myself included, way more interested in these stories. I hate coming on here and reviewing these pay-per-views and talking about how this will be a cool direction to go in, and then you see the next month and a half of TV play out and it absolutely sucks. And then you get to the next pay-per-view and it's really good, but then you get to the next several weeks of TV and they mostly suck. On and off all year, and it's very frustrating. So hopefully they can turn that around next year, but we'll see. But as for me, thank you guys for listening, and hopefully you enjoyed this recap of the show. What did you think of the show? Of course, you can leave a comment down below and like this video if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter/X. You'll be seeing a lot of content from me rolling out over these next several days as the year comes to a close and a new year begins. I'll be uploading my top 20 matches countdown pretty soon, probably not too long after this one hits YouTube. So I'll be talking about that. I'll be talking about that Wrestle Dynasty show in Japan, probably a hybrid Wrestle Dynasty, Wrestle Kingdom show. I'm still figuring that out. And then, of course, come January 6th, that's the big Monday Night Raw debut on Netflix, and I will definitely be talking about that show as well. So a lot of big stuff coming up on the channel over these next few days. Hopefully you all enjoy the ride and follow along with me for any craziness that I talk about in this crazy world of pro wrestling. But till next time, take care.